Alrighty, boys and girls, welcome to lesson 4 of our module 3. Today we're going to read Signs of Hope, pages 10 through 17. Our target is to identify the main ideas and to write a summary. And remember, we include our main ideas in the summary. So let's get started. We're going to begin here. So if I look here, I might notice there's already a picture and it says many public places, especially in the South, were segregated. And there's the word segregated, which is like separated. In the post-Civil War segregated world, Black people and white people went to separate schools, ate in separate restaurants, stayed in separate hotels, and sat in different sections on trains and buses. In many places, they used different bathrooms, telephone booths, and water fountains. Blacks and whites went to separate pool halls, auditoriums, and circuses. Many blacks were restricted from using parks, libraries, and hospitals that served white people. Signs on public facilities often read colored and white in an effort to help one race or to keep one race from coming in contact with the other. Segregation was part of everyday life almost everywhere, especially in the South. My father was 6 months old in the summer of 1919, the Red Summer. African American blood flowed as Black people were assaulted and killed in race riots and lynchings. The racial tension escalated when Southern Blacks moved north to join in jobs created by World War I. From 1915 to 1930, nearly 1.5 million Black people migrated north at a rate of 100,000 per year. Many of them settled in New York, Chicago, St. Louis, and Detroit. The Black families who fled the South during this period hoped to find a better life and escape Jim Crow life. However, they soon discovered that Jim Crow traveled too. The rapid shift in population caused overcrowding in many cities and increased resentment from many white workers who were now forced to work alongside Blacks. Negroes have come north to stay, find chance for independence here. And then we have this picture here of these African American family. When African American families left the South, they took with them their hopes for freedom and opportunity. Mallie Robinson, my grandmother, was one of the early pioneer migrants. She lived on a farm in Cairo, Georgia in 1919 with her husband Jerry and their 5 children. They were sharecroppers, which meant they farmed a section of land owned by whites for a share of the profit from the crops. This system kept Black sharecroppers like my grandparents from getting ahead. Sharecroppers didn't own their own farms. They had to buy all their seeds, food, and equipment on credit from the white landowner. At the end of the year, the Black farmer had to give the white landowner up to one half of his crop and repay all the credit. The Black farmers ended up with very little and often owed money to the white owner. After dealing with frustrations of sharecropping, Jerry Robinson gave up and deserted the family. Mallie couldn't maintain the farm on her own. But my grandmother was a determined woman with an unflappable faith in God. She packed up her children, Frank, Mac, Edgar, Willa Mae, and Jackie, and took a huge risk. Mallie and her family left the only life they'd ever known. They traveled by train to Pasadena, California. There, they lived with their brother until Mallie found work and a place for her family to live. My grandmother worked long hours cleaning and cooking in the homes of white families. Meanwhile, she insisted her children keep up their grades, work after school, and attend church every day. The children learned early to protect each other. For a couple of years, my dad's sister, Willa Mae, took my sister to school with her. Dad played alone in his sandbox outside her classroom until the kids came out for recess. And then here we have a picture. It says Mallie Robinson and her 5 children from left to right. Mac, my dad, Edgar, Willa Mae, Frank. They moved from Georgia to California in the early 1920s. So here is Jackie Robinson right here. As a boy, Dad went to Cleveland and Washington elementary schools in Pasadena. The students were Black, the teachers were white. My father only got average grades, but he loved sports. With marbles, soccer, dodgeball, and baseball, Dad's reputation as a competitor and a winner began when he was just a young boy. Pasadena was a pretty city with lots of parks and other public recreational facilities. My dad couldn't go in most of them. The local YMCA refused my father membership because he was Black. The Pasadena movie houses he went to forced Black people to sit in one section. The local soda foundation wouldn't serve black people or black kids. Pasadena was divided into neighborhoods according to race. The boundaries were clearly drawn. Blacks lived in only certain parts of town. That didn't stop my grandmother. Mally and her sister and brother-in-law, Cora and Samuel Wade, raised enough money to buy a house. They ignored the racial boundaries and settled on a house at 121 Pepper Street. The house they wanted happened to be in an all-white neighborhood. According to family stories, my grandmother knew that the owners wouldn't sell their home to a black family. Mally got a light-skinned niece who could pass for white to purchase the Pepper Street house for them. After the closing, the Robinson and Wade families moved in together. The neighbors weren't exactly welcoming. Over here we have a picture. It says Mallet Robinson watches Jackie Robinson play ball with his nephews in the yard at a house on 121 Pepper Street. My father lived in the house until 1941. My father was 3 years old when him and his family moved to Pepper Street. When he was 8, Dad got into a name-calling fight with the little white girl who lived across the street. The children's verbal battle was interrupted when the girl's father came out and started throwing rocks at my father. There were other incidents like that meant to intimidate my grandmother into moving off Pepper Street. A cross was burned on their front lawn, but in spite of the pressure from neighbors, my grandmother refused to leave Pepper Street. Over time, the block became mixed with families from black, white, Asian, and Hispanic backgrounds. While my father fought relatively small battles against racism in Pasadena, African American leaders across the country took the struggle to a new level. They waged battles in courts and newspapers and at street demonstrations. They supported educational and economic equity. Black leaders and activists such as Ida B. Wells, Booker T. Washington, and W. E. B. Du Bois took different positions and offered different solutions to the problems of racial equality. By the 1920s, there were visible signs of hope and progress. Black-owned and operated newspapers like the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, Boston's The Guardian, Ebony Magazine, also known as the Negro Digest, the NAACP's monthly magazine, The Crisis, and the Associated Negro Press. And then over here we have different pictures of the African American activists. This is Ida B. Wells. We have William Edward Du Bois. Then we have Madame C.J. Walker. She was an entrepreneur. And then we have Booker T. Washington. He was a slave, an educator, and an author and a spokesman. And then here we have Paul Robeson, and then Langston Hughes. He is a poet. You might have read some of his poetry last year in 4th grade. We have the Duke Ellington, band leader from jazz, and then we have Zora Neale Hurston, and she's an anthropologist. An anthropologist is what digs up bones. So, let's go back to our story. So the Crisis, Associated Negro Press, sprang up to tell the story of racial progress and encourage an anti-segregation resistance movement. There was also a small but growing professional class of African Americans who taught school, worked in hospitals as nurses and doctors, practiced law, and owned businesses. The Harlem Renaissance, named after New York City's vibrant black neighborhood, Harlem, brought forth great African American writers, artists, and musicians. Artists like Jacob Lawrence, Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Countee Cullen, Zora Neale Hurston, jazz musicians like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, performers like singer-actor Paul Robeson, dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson, all rose to new heights of fame and popularity through the Harlem Renaissance. The glory of the Harlem Renaissance was short-lived. In 1929, it was replaced by a deep economic depression. Dad was in junior high at the time. He helped his family out by taking an odd job delivering newspapers, cutting neighbors' grass, selling hot dogs during football games at Pasadena's Rose Bowl. And he endured the problems associated with being poor and fatherless. When he was a teenager, Dad and his friends formed the Pepper Street Gang. They didn't use drugs, drink alcohol, or start fights, but they did throw clumps of dirt at passing cars, swipe golf balls and sell them back at the golfers, and steal fruit from the local grocers. Several key factors helped my dad avoid serious trouble. The first and most important was his devotion to his mother and the values she worked hard to instill in him. The second was his love of athletics. Most of Dad's energy went into playing sports. In 1935, he was a star high school football quarterback at Muir Tech, where he also played baseball, basketball, tennis, and held records in track. Dad's older brothers were another big influence on him. He really looked up to Edgar, Frank, and Mac. Dad didn't always remember or understand Edgar's odd behavior, but he admired his love of speed. Edgar's feats on roller skates and his bicycle were legendary. It was said Edgar could outrace the bus from Pasadena to Santa Monica, a 30-mile trip. Frank was my dad's favorite brother, but Mac became his idol. When Dad was 13, he watched with pride as Mac won a place on the U.S. Olympic track and field team. Mac went to Berlin, Germany for the 1936 Olympic Games. Dad listened to all the track meets on the radio. The U.S. relay team, made up African American athletes, Johnny Woodruff, Ralph Metcalfe, Cornelius Johnson, won the gold medal. So here's Mac Robinson, and he's training for the Olympics. I can infer from reading this that the Robinsons were a family that really liked sports and they were extremely competitive. So the 1936 U.S. Olympic relay team's victory was more than a personal athletic triumph. The team won one for humanity. The performances of my uncle and other African American athletes shattered Nazi leader Adolf Hitler's theory of racial superiority. The Nazis, who rose to power in Germany in the 30s, believed that select white people known as Aryans were superior to all races, including blacks and non-Aryan whites. German leader Hitler snubbed Jesse Owens by refusing to shake his hand at the Olympic medal awards ceremony. But Black America and freedom lovers everywhere celebrated the stunning victory over racism. The 30s saw the rise of other African American sports heroes. Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, was one of the most admired athletes of the time. On June 22, 1938, the heavyweight champion faced Germany's Max Schmeling in the ring. Like the 36 Olympics, more than sports records were riding on the outcome. Europe was on the verge of the Second World War. Adolf Hitler gave Schmeling the idea of the racially pure man, a hero send-off. Americans counted on Joe Louis to bring them victory. The fight of the century was on. It was as if war had already been declared. Louis knocked out Schmeling in 2 minutes, 4 seconds in round one. Joyous Americans all over the country, blacks and whites, celebrated in the streets. So here's where it says Joe Louis wins, and he was a KO to Max Schmeling, which was extremely obviously important because of the race wars at that time. But the victory party didn't last. The next morning, America woke up still separate and unequal. And so then we go into the next section, a determined pair. All right, so we just got done reading this section. The next challenge that we need to do is go back through the text and identify the main ideas. Remember, main ideas is what is the author trying to say in this section? So what's the biggest, most important ideas the author is trying to say? And obviously this is a long text, so when we write a summary, it's only going to be a couple paragraphs. And we will begin by using your document that goes along with this assignment in Google Classroom. You will find main idea 1 and main idea 2. We will do main idea 1 together, and then the second one you will find on your own. Alrighty, now that you're finished listening to this section, you're going to join our class meet, and then we will have a conversation. Thanks, guys. We will see you soon.